inadequately for Mayor Dean, who's over on the Workforce Committee meeting right now. But we're delighted that you're all here. We're delighted that this work is getting underway. We had a first meeting of the Policy Committee on Thursday. I think it went really well, and it was very exciting to get that started. And we're now engaged with their committee chair and vice chair and helping them identify next steps and line up subject matter experts. The first item on our agenda for today is selecting a committee chair and a vice chair. The vice chair is the position that we previously described as a reporter. We thought that having a vice chair made more sense. That way, if a chair is not present, the vice chair can step in. We are asking that the vice chair take the lead in drafting recommendations for each committee. We will be taking notes on this committee, and we'll be sharing notes with the chair and vice chair. So note-taking is not a responsibility of the vice chair, but drafting recommendations is. And we want to give everyone who is potentially interested in serving in one of those positions a chance to nominate themselves, or you can also nominate someone else. We'd ask that you say a few words about yourself and why you're interested in serving as chair or vice chair. And then if we have multiple candidates, we will do just a roll call vote to select our chair and vice chair. Obviously, the first responsibility of the chair is to run a fair and efficient meeting. It is a position which will require some time. After each meeting, chairs and vice chairs will have follow-up conversations with me, Eric Brown, or Dia Cirillo, or Breonna Crawford. We're the 4 staff members who are supporting the work of this commission. So please be aware of those additional responsibilities if you decide to put yourself forward for one of those roles. With that, I'd just like anyone who might be interested in serving as, we'll start with chair, to raise their hand so I can recognize you and say a few words about yourself, please. Do we have anyone interested in serving as chair? Yes, Judge Blackburn.
I would like to nominate myself to serve as chair. I have worked for the last 6 years as a judge in Davidson County, working as the mental health court judge and the veterans court judge. I have also served as presiding judge for 1.5 years here in Davidson County and have worked very closely on criminal justice reform with the mayor and with the general sessions courts, and would be very honored and would look forward to the challenge.
Thank you very much, Judge Blackburn. I appreciate your interest in this. Is there anyone else interested in serving as committee chair?
Hello.
Yes, Ms. Roberson.
I actually was going to nominate myself, but I will defer to Judge Blackburn, but I am the president and CEO of the YWCA Nashville and Middle Tennessee. And the YWCA as a whole, all of our affiliates have studied the issue of policing and police policies for a number of years, really since Ferguson. And so we have quite a bit of background in this area. We also have club programs in 22, for one of our programs, in 23 metro public school systems. So we understand the interaction. Of course, we run the Weaver Domestic Violence Center and have trained police officers in the Nashville community to make sure that they are all on board with how to handle vulnerable populations. And so all of the things that we are looking at, I have a background experience doing.
Very aware of your work in this area, Ms. Roberson. Very excited to have you as part of this process. If I heard you correctly, you are not going to put yourself forward as a chair committee member at this point. Is that right? Or do you want to be considered for that position?
Well, I think if the judge wants to, and she was the first to say this, we might as well move on with the committee. But I will serve as chair if no one else was interested, but she is interested. So.
Well, there is a vice chair position as well. Before we turn to that, are there any other candidates for chair? Yes, sir. Mr. Foster.
I was just going to nominate Ms. Roberson if she had not nominated herself due to her extensive work and research. So I just want to affirm Ms. Roberson and her position and her experience, and I really appreciate it. I also appreciate Judge Blackburn, her extensive experience in this field. So I think we'll be great with either of these wonderful women. But I was going to nominate Ms. Roberson. So that's all I have to say.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Do we have any other candidates for that position, or shall we move to the roll call vote?
We only have one. We really only have one candidate.
Well, so Judge Blackburn is a candidate, and Mr. Foster is, I think, attempting to put you forward as a candidate for this position. I guess I could ask the question, sorry, trying to be a little bit informal here. Would you accept the nomination to be a candidate for chairperson, or would you perhaps prefer to be vice chair or considered for vice chair? I don't want to put my finger on the scale in any way here.
Well, I don't know who might be interested in vice chair. We'll go ahead and let the judge be the chair of the committee if that's the position that she would like to be in. But I that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. If we're all good with that, let's move on to the vice chair position. Are there any candidates for vice chair?
Mr. Bund, it's David Esquivel. I'd like to nominate Ms. Roberson for vice chair.
Second. Bob Fisher. Second.
Are there any other candidates for vice chair? I believe we have our chair and vice chair. Congratulations to both of you. We're so pleased to have you leading this committee. As the new chair, Judge Blackburn, I feel it would be appropriate to turn this meeting over to you because this is a first meeting and because Dia and I and our team have prepared the agenda. What I might propose in this first meeting is that we work a little hand in glove to walk through this agenda with you. In the future, of course, as chair and vice chair, we will work with you directly to prepare an agenda that reflects your interests. But I'd love to propose that we perhaps move through this agenda with your leadership, if that is agreeable to the two of you.
I think that would be very helpful this evening since you prepared the agenda.
Fantastic. Well, what we'd like to do then is we'll move on to item number 3. And in that, we're going to sort of talk about two things. One, we want to talk about the themes for this committee. We want to talk a little bit about the general themes that we heard at the first full commission meeting, and specifically about the themes or areas that we think reflect this committee's interests. And then I also want to have my colleague, Dia Cirillo, talk a little bit about the process that we're proposing you use to make decisions and to set priorities. So Dia, do you want to step in at this moment? And would you also introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about your background before moving to themes and process?
Sure, delighted to do so. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Madam Chair and Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to work with you. I know some of you have had the privilege of working with Judge Blackburn. My name is Dia Cirillo. I bring over 2 decades of experience in public policy, strategic planning, and systems change, including collective impact. I've led several organizational turnarounds and strategic plans. I am a Chicago native, and the bulk of my career was in Illinois. This March, I had the pleasure of joining Metro Public Health Department to help support their initiative on community mental health systems improvement, which looks at decriminalizing mental illness. I also support the Mayor's Behavioral Health and Wellness Advisory Council. Prior to that, I ran my own consulting firm, Spring Consulting, to mobilize strategies for social impact. Stakeholder engagement has always sat at the core of my practice, and that is reflected in leading a county-wide mental health redesign initiative in Rutherford County during its inaugural year. The initiative involved 28 organizations representing 4 sectors: healthcare, education, social services, and law enforcement. While I was in the Illinois governor's office, I also directed a national demonstration project on healthcare reform implementation to support behavioral health integration in the HIE. The project involved 8 state agencies, 4 statewide health-related associations, over 1,000 professionals through webinars, and over 300 behavioral health care providers. I have also worked on transportation equity, which culminated in a $30 million fund at the state level and requirements to close the spatial mismatch between affordable housing and jobs. And prior to that, I co-chaired a state level interagency committee on community transportation. So my background is really rooted in this kind of work, which is how do we engage subject matter experts like yourselves, professionals in the field, individuals with lived experience, in the process of creating policy and change for our communities. I am going to just quickly go through the memo that was sent out to you earlier today and just hit some of the high points on that memo. Certainly what we heard in the kickoff meeting on August 19th were, some very clear themes came out of that. Certainly the commission is interested in policies around use of force, police department culture, diversity in the workforce, specifically looking at recruiting, retention, and promotion, training of the workforce with a focus on bias, de-escalation, cultural competency, and trauma-informed approaches. And of course, general themes around transportation, collaboration, and accountability. And particularly an interest in looking at the relationship with the Community Oversight Board. Certainly for this committee, some of the core themes that really are reflected in the mission document are focused on vulnerable populations. So that's youth, individuals presenting with mental health or behavioral health conditions, community policing, MNPS and the school population. So these are all, and certainly MMPD action as it relates to use of force. What is recommended in the memo that went out today to help ground the work of the committee? We have a little bit of background noise on the video platform, and so if folks would just endeavor to keep their line muted until they're open to speak, that would help some of this. But the methods that we're looking at in terms of supporting the committee and what we are recommending is really based on a methodology that looks at program performance. And it's rooted in 3 questions. How much are we doing? How well are we doing it? And who is better off? We measure who is better off by looking at skills, attitudes, behaviors, and circumstances. This allows us to ask very specific questions around the data that you are about to receive tomorrow. We will be supporting the work of the committee by providing a level set packet that you'll receive tomorrow. And we will also be working with you to identify subject matter experts, to line them up to speak in the committee meetings, as well as individuals with lived experience. So I think, John, that takes care of the process. And I can tell there's always a set of guidelines for every committee meeting, but I can tell just by looking at the attendee list that everybody inherently understands the importance of being on time and showing up and all those good things. We do want to move through this process by consensus. Certainly, if there's a difference of opinion within the committee, we can take a policy issue to vote and use Robert's Rules of Order to help us make our decision. Certainly you as committee members are welcome to attend other committees as attendees. If you'd like to speak in those meetings, it's important that you connect with the chair of those committees to be added as a panelist. And if we don't hear from you in this virtual setting, we will assume that silence is considered agreement. So please be sure to speak up. So that's what I've got for you. And I'm going to turn it back to John. Nice to meet you all.
Before we continue, There was a housekeeping matter, but I think it has been addressed. I wanted to, I will proceed with substance. So as we move to item number 4, next steps for the committee. First, we want to ask you all if you're comfortable with the sort of process that we've presented in the policy memo. Does that look like a reasonable way to move forward? We wanted to get your feedback on that.
It's Jennifer Gamble speaking. Just to clarify your question, are you asking if we're okay with the process that you all have outlined for how we'll conduct the committee?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about the themes, and here we definitely want to hear from you all. So as we were listening at the first meeting, we heard we talked a lot about vulnerable populations, and specifically, I think people with mental health and behavioral health issues, their encounters with law enforcement can be very fraught. There are other uniquely vulnerable populations, the LGBTQ community, the trans community in particular is a population which we've heard a lot of concern about. Young people, of course, are a vulnerable population. We want to be very careful about how Mmpd react there. I think we also heard, MNPS is something we want to look at, and I expect as we think about identifying subject matter experts, that really understanding how principals and how MPS are utilizing school resource officers will be an important part of our discussion. There was also a lot of interest expressed in community policing and what would, how does that currently work in Nashville? What might a more robust version of community policing look like? There has been since early 2018 a sort of pilot program running in West Precinct, which Mmpd describes as neighborhood engagement. Recently, Acting Chief Drake has moved to redeploy some of the flex units as neighborhood engagement teams. So I think it'll be really interesting to talk about what community partnership will look like and what partner-oriented crime prevention looks like. These are all some important themes, I think, for this committee to explore. I know there's a great deal of expertise on this committee about dealing with vulnerable populations, about community policing, and I definitely would like to ask the chair and the vice chair and others, such as Mr. Foster and others, to sort of talk about what you all see as working currently in the system. What are things that are working well? What are things that we should be building on? Are there programs elsewhere or approaches in other parts of the country that you're interested in learning more about? Let's spend some time in this part of the discussion, and then we can turn towards what subject matter experts you want to hear from.
John, I'm going to just jump in really quickly and just invite folks as they speak to introduce themselves, who they are, what organization they're affiliated with, and maybe just 30 seconds on their background.
That's a great idea. Thank you for that suggestion, Dia.
Well, John, it's Judge Blackburn. And I want to say first, in this venue, please just call me Melissa. Let's drop the judge and just call me Melissa when we're talking and we're working through these, because it's just going to be our tight group. So just drop it. It's Melissa. I work every day with the mental health population, both in the courtroom and outside. And I want to drill down on some of those resources, whether it be the mental health co-op, where anyone in crisis is taken by a police officer, and that process. I'd like for us to talk with the co-op and find out from them what is working and what's not working. because I know we've streamlined the process because the co-op was able to expand their physical campus so that officers don't sit over there any longer for half a day with someone. They're able to basically drop someone off and leave. But I think we need to look at that process when someone's in crisis. I also think we need to look at the process when they go to, when an officer takes someone to general when they're in crisis as well. We need to look at both of those processes. I know, and I had one of my staff, my court administrator, in fact, today, check with Deputy Chief Huggins. There is a manner in which an officer is made aware if someone has received mental health services through the jail or has come through the mental health court before an officer takes a warrant out to serve it on someone's home. They're aware that that person has received mental health services. Several years ago in Oak Hill, they were attempting to serve a warrant on someone. He had received mental health services. He committed suicide during the process. And we tried subsequently to avert those things happening by making the officers aware that there is someone that may have a mental health need before they make that knock on the door, both for the officer's safety and the individual safety. Things like that we've tried to put in place. Memphis has a totally different process they go through. And I think it would be good to talk with Memphis and find out more about how they engage the officers, both for the officer's safety and the individual safety.
Those are wonderful comments. I think it would be helpful for everyone, perhaps, just to go around and introduce themselves briefly and sort of speak to this subject.
Okay, John, I'll go next because what I would like, I know many of the programs and have interfaced with the police on many of the programs. There's this huge list of initiatives that the police have in place. What I don't know is I know on a limited basis our interaction. For instance, the lethality assessment programs for domestic violence victims. They have a Handle with Cares program with the Metro Nashville Public Schools, the Family Intervention Program, Strengthening Families, Hispanic and Latino refugees and immigrants. And I do want to add the immigrant population to that vulnerable group. Make sure we do not forget that group is very significant. They have a Family Safety Center partnership, Citizens Police Academy with 100 Black men. They have trauma-informed techniques that they have been taught, LGBTQ coordinator, L Protector program. I have a whole list of programs that I'm just aware of. However, what I don't know is how well the police are implementing all of these programs that are on paper. And I would like for someone to speak to this group to tell us, when I say working with mobile crisis, we deal with mobile crisis at the Weaver Center on a regular basis. What I want to know is when mobile crisis, when they intervene and when they don't, and who is called. Here's an example. We had a young man, I don't want to take up too much time, but we had a young man in our Weaver Center. And he was in a crisis. He was a ninth grader. He did not want to be there with his mother. He wanted to be with his father, even though his father had an order of protection against him. And even though he had been abused by his father, this is the way children sometimes react. When the police officers showed up, and he was part of the immigrant population, this police officer, and I called them I've talked to the police about this situation. They were going to take this little boy to juvenile and to the juvenile justice system. And that was not where this little boy belonged. Fortunately, our social workers intervened and said, even though he's being violent, we'll keep him here at Weaver rather than him going to that system. My husband, who's a psychiatrist, says he gets calls all the time when there are white children that are acting up in the community and they get taken to Vanderbilt Psychiatric Hospital. I want to know how you make the decision between the police taking a child to Vanderbilt Psychiatric Hospital when they're in crisis and when they take an immigrant child in the Weaver Center to the juvenile system. I want to know how that decision is made. I need someone to explain these programs. Like I said, we have a very close relationship, work with police officers, but I want to know more about all of these initiatives that they have in place, whether or not they are really being implemented, and how much latitude do the police officers have in making these decisions? Is there a better way that we can do this enforcement of the situation?
That makes lots of sense. That's very helpful. Yeah. There's some good questions to ask.
I'll volunteer to go next. As a councilwoman of District 3, I have experienced a similar situation, but with the homeless population, where police where they may take over a business or private property to set up a homeless camp. And before calling the police to have the camp removed, we're fortunate to work with social service agencies such as Room in the Inn, where we call them and they'll send out counselors to go and see if they can provide support to the homeless before we call in the police to have them removed. So if there's a similar situation where a homeless man, for example, the incident not too long ago where the homeless man was arrested for not wearing a mask, it would have been great to have the police contact a social service agency, Room in the Inn, or some other agency to come and address that, as opposed to arresting him and taking him to jail. And I don't know if it was a racial, because he was a Black man, because a lot of times in dealing with the homeless in my district, in my area north of town, we have white and Black homeless that are being that are needing assistance, needing help, and it seems like we get more help to the white homeless, and then the incident where we have this Black man who's arrested. But I agree that if there are social service programs that we can connect the MMPD with for low crime instances, whether it's trespassing, whether it's not wearing a mask, or something to that effect, where we can bring in social service to help provide aid and assistance before taking someone to jail.
I can go next. Good evening, everyone. Julianos, Pinacano, Executive Director at Conexión Americas. Sharon, thank you so much for adding immigrant origin families to vulnerable populations. Not only when I speak about immigrant origin families, I'm speaking about immigrants first generation, but also American-born children who have immigrant origin parents. Right now, we're dealing and working with a lot of American-born children who are being deeply and disproportionately impacted by the status of their parents, and some interactions with law enforcement. At Conexión Americas, we have very strong ties with MMPD and law enforcement, but we keep hearing from families not only the lack of trust when it comes to directly interacting with law enforcement, a lot of questions about immigrations, people status being asked, where were you born? When you get pulled over by the police, sometimes they get asked that question. It seems it's a matter of helping, but instead of helping families, and of course we are concerned that they are asking for additional information. The one thing that I would love to explore is explicit and implicit biases in law enforcement, and how can we be a resource, but also explore what kind of training officers receive to tackle these very important pieces, right? As we move forward to reimagine what law enforcement will look like in Nashville, Tennessee. And again, just cementing what I said earlier, when we're talking about immigrant origin families, we're also talking about American-born children, youth, and citizens that are participating in, of course, our society. And a little bit about my background: I work in civil rights in DC at the longest Latino civil rights organization in the country. So I'm honored to be part of this conversation, and whatever we can do to help, I'm here to serve. So, but thank you, Sharon, for adding immigrant origin families.
Thank you. Just jump right in if you haven't spoken. Don't be shy.
Hey, this is Bob Fisher at Belmont. Thanks for all the previous comments, and I certainly share every one of those concerns. I was so happy to be put on this task force because seeing people who are mentally ill incarcerated because they're mentally ill breaks my heart. And it breaks my heart to see homeless people end up in prison. And I think it's so important that we look around the community, and that's what I'm hoping we can do. There is a wealth of resources in Nashville for community service. I mean, you've mentioned Room in the Inn, and they're such a premier amazing group, but there's a lot more organizations trying to help people, whether they're homeless or your references to those who are helping with the mentally ill. And we need for our police department to form these partnerships with these organizations and leverage those resources, because those people want to help. They want to get the call. I know, just a very quick story. I was walking across campus last winter on a cold night, and there's a homeless guy sleeping on the steps of our law building. And I went up to say something, just, "Are you okay?" And he was agitated, and I just backed off and asked our security guys to come talk with him and get him somewhere where he could be cared for. And I've stood back and watched them work and watched them de-escalate that situation and get him down to the rescue mission and get him a warm bed and a meal. And rather than, calling, I was a little nervous about just making a call to the police. I don't want him to end up in prison. And so that's critical to me. We've got the resources to do it, and we've got people that want to do it, whether it's churches or nonprofits. And the other piece is just the community image of the police. I know that they want to, as badly as we want them to change that image and to see themselves in the communities as friends and helpers. And if we can start with the young kids, that's a great place to start. And I want to hear from the police. What are you doing in those areas? I just simply don't know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perhaps to make this easy and natural, I might go to the alphabet and just move through our list that way, if that's agreeable. Mr. Foster, would you be willing to introduce yourself and share some thoughts on these subjects?
Sure. I'm going to give a warning. It will not be short.
Mr. Esquivel, forgive my knowledge of the alphabet. I'm coming back to you. That was terrible.
I'll tag out.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. That's very good.
I'm also happy to defer, to F before E if we want to mix things up a little bit.
I've conveyed what kind of day I've had.
Well, I'm David Esquivel. I'm the pro bono partner at the Bass, Berry & Sims law firm, and I will take up where President Fisher left off, which is that I'm eager to learn. I'm in no manner a subject matter expert in policing practices or policies. What I have is an interest to learn, and it appears that we have the mandate and the resources to gather a lot of information and to hear from subject matter experts and to find out what other communities are doing or have done that have been successful and move Nashville in that direction. And so I'm very eager to be a part of that work. And so on the issue, in terms of the themes and what you all have laid out, I think it is a good plan. And one thing that strikes me, I appreciate Ms. Roberson saying adding the immigrant community to the list of vulnerable populations. I think that's important. I would also add what I think is missing, which is race. Race is not explicitly stated in our mandate as a vulnerable population, and it seems like a fairly obvious concern to our community and many communities in our country right now, the disparity in race and particularly African Americans and their interactions with police. And that is something that I think I would want to highlight and make sure it was an express part of what we consider our work to be. And so the only other thing I would add at this point in terms of our plan is, as I look at our mandate and the topics that we want to investigate and make recommendations on. It's very broad, and there are a lot of sources of information that I think have a lot of data for us. So I'm hoping that as part of this meeting or the follow-up to this meeting, we will start to make lists and understand. I mean, there is a lot of data and policies from the police department in the areas that we've been charged to look at that I would like to start reviewing as soon as we can. We have Metro Nashville Public Schools and the youth in our community. And again, just looking at the categories that you've laid out in our plan, there's a lot of data and policies from MNPS that I think would be good for us to start reviewing. And then the nonprofits, many of them are represented by members of our committee that have direct contact and knowledge and experience and can bring people to our committee who have the lived experience, but also data that would be relevant. I think a good starting point for us is to think about those organizations that already keep data and have policies and start to feed that information to us. I would like to get started on that as soon as possible. And I appreciate the opportunity to serve on this, and I'm glad to be working with all of you.
Wholly agree with those priority areas, David, obviously. I guess I'll switch to first names, and I'll say Eli. Mr. Foster, you're up.
Eli, Mr. Foster, either way is fine. I'm extremely long-winded, and I'm a storyteller, which works with being a teacher, right? Because kids like to hear things in stories. They learn in stories. So I feel like it's important to tell how I got here. 20 years ago, I was getting a Master's of Divinity in urban ministry in Philadelphia. I lived in right in an area of Philadelphia where North Philly comes in contact with Germantown. And the mayor at the time had a program called Safe Streets, where he put police on some of the deadliest streets in Philadelphia, 24 hours around the block on the street. So for 3 years while I was getting my Master's of Divinity, we had police on our block because of the nature of our street. So I got to see very firsthand how police interacted with under-resourced community. The community was 98% Black and very poor. Upon graduation, I moved to Baltimore. Also lived in a community that was under-resourced and did youth development. I was a youth pastor at a church for about 7 years and did community engagement and development through sports leagues and tutoring. And at this time, got to see even more firsthand interactions between police and youth, particularly Black youth. Had some positive engagements with the police at this time. There was a community policing program that was really positive, as well as some negatives. There was, on occasion, I am married to a woman of a different race. My wife is Black. And on one occasion, we ran into an encounter with the police that did not like that, and I ended up in handcuffs. So I have been on the other side of having an experience and having difficulties. It obviously, as a white man, that is a little bit more rare. After that, I moved to Nashville and was a teacher. I am particularly concerned about our immigrant population. For the first 6 years, I was an EL teacher. Worked very closely with Conexion Americas several years ago at Wright Middle. And I was there at the same time that President Trump was going through the primary, and oftentimes would work through the pain that our students from El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala would have about the fears that were in front of them before transferring to Bellevue. For me personally, I want to echo several things I've heard. Mr. Esquivel, I really appreciate the focus on, thank you, the focus on race. I wrote an article for the Tennessean that was published a few weeks ago about how for white individuals, racism is an addiction. And I truly believe the historical nature of racial oppression in our country, starting in 1619 and lasting to the present, has set up a system where we have a racist system that benefits white individuals and that we benefit from. So whether it's the police, whether it's education, which also has significant difficulties with it in terms of our suspension rates. I know that the Tennessean did a report in our suspension rates 2 years ago. We suspended 3 times more African-American students than white students. So I fundamentally believe if we are truly wrestling with this, race has to be first and foremost, and how we're continuing to say, how do we deal with systems of oppression in this country? We have a country that was set up to benefit white individuals at the same time of denigrating Black and of color individuals. In terms of our policies going forward, so that's a little background. I did some reading and I just made a few notes. One of the things that was really important, I read the Community Oversight Board policy report on the 8 Can't Wait, produced by Campaign Zero. And from page 12, it says this interesting statement: while we stand by the idea that any political leaders truly invested in protecting Black lives should adopt the 8 Can't Wait policies, we also believe that the end goal for all of us should be an absolute liberation from policing. So I wanted to dig around that because that seems really scary. And in terms of digging around that, the question really is, if we're reimagining, then what do we want our society to be like, right? What do we want, right? The ultimate goal of public safety is to not need people to keep the public safe because we have adequate jobs and adequate housing and adequate education. So I just want to keep that in our mind of where we want to go. We want to go in public safety to the standpoint that we do not need individuals to protect us because we are doing right by each other. Now, obviously, that's incredibly optimistic, and we are not there yet. But I think keeping your goal in mind when you talk about truly reimagining is really important. I have one question, several questions. One, there's an author, activist named D. Ray McKesson with Campaign Zero, who often says only 5% of police arrests are for violent crimes. My question would be, what are the other 95% of arrests for? Is that accurate with Mmpd? I don't know if it is, right? You know, people say statistics. I don't know if it is. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The other question I would have, I really appreciate how we're thinking in terms of what are mental health supports. So I would wonder, what is the triage approach with our emergency responders, like a 911 operator? What are triage options, right? Could you option it as a triage to mental health co-op? Could you option it as a triage? You know, I really want us to think, how can we change things on that front end before the police then need to make that decision if we change the way where that decision process is? I made a list of some people that I would like to call in. I would love to call in police officers. One in particular is Commander Dwayne Green. He is working with community engagement. I would love to reach back to our historical roots of Nashville, when one of our most amazing times in our history occurred in the sit-ins in 1960 because of the training by Reverend Jim Lawson. I would love to call Reverend Lawson in. I would love to call Dr. Philip Atiba Goff. He's with the Center for Policing Equity, and often he does work around looking at what we can do in terms of equity in policing. I would love to call Dr. Carol Anderson. She is a professor at Emory, author of the book White Rage, that has talked about the way systems were created to continue to have racist systems in our society. I think it would help from a systematic standpoint. I would love to call in Judith Brown Deannis. She's the executive director of the Advancement Project that deals with the school to prison pipeline. I would love to call in Ron Davis. He had 30 years in the police force, and he was the former director of community-oriented policing with the U.S. Justice Department. I would love to call in Vanita Gupta. She's the president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And lastly, I would love to call in Ashford Hughes. He's with the Office of Equity and Diversity with MNPS, and he was formerly worked for both Mayor Barry and for Mayor Briley. I apologize for talking such a long time, and I apologize if I'm making you write fast. I can get you those names. But I really wanted to take this very seriously for me, because let's just be honest, I have imposter syndrome and don't think I deserve to be here, unlike everybody else who is like, wow, I'm just honored to be in the same room with many of you. So thank you so much, and I'm just honored, like for real, for real. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Reverend Greer.
Thank you, and I'm delighted also to serve on this committee. I think I may bring a different view from a point of police officer and being in the community. I joined the Metropolitan Police Department in 1971 and retired in 2004 with the rank of sergeant. I served as patrol officer for about a year and a half, detective for almost 15, as a peer counselor in the counseling program for police officers and families who were having issues with marriage or whatever problems that they had, police officers and civilian employees. I spent the last years from 1986 to 1990 as a peer counselor in the PASS program with the police department. Last about 18 years, I was the chaplain for the police department and saw over my career both sides of society. I've also been pastor in the North Nashville area, Lower East Nashville, for the last 30 years. I do sort of sympathize with police officers and the community. I, for one, believe that one of the biggest problems with community and our police department, whatever race, but especially in the African-American community, is that we don't know each other. I think there are a lot of people who don't know that, for the most part, most officers, majority of officers are hardworking officers. They come to work every day, do their jobs the right way, and they have the heart of the community in them. And then the community doesn't know that, but sometimes police officers, because sometimes with the training, sometimes because of the day-to-day operation, where you come in contact most of your day with people who are not on the up and up, people who are criminals, and police officers may have the tendency to start to think that everybody in the community is a criminal because that's all we deal with, a criminal. Lady once asked me, why is it that police officers, when you see them driving, they're always serious, they look like they're preoccupied, they're serious. And it's simple, they're never en route to a call where somebody's going to say, hey, officer, I call you out here to say you're doing a great job and hope you have a great day. So there's a lot of pressure there. But I think that some of our problem with the police department and the community is that we don't know each other. And I don't know if we're going to explore ways that we as a community and we as police officers can come together and have ways of getting to know each other, ways for police officers to interact with the communities, not in a criminal setting, but in a helping setting. You know, the motto used to be to serve and protect, but serve first. And we have to look at our officers as being people who are to serve us, and they have to look at their job as being servants of the community. Also, the community, including churches, different organizations, sororities, fraternities, have to be active in this. It's not just on the police officers to get to know us, but we have to invite them into our churches, into whatever is going on in our communities. And I think that will go a long way. Supposing, somebody mentioned the Reverend Jim Lawson, who taught nonviolent techniques at the American Baptist College and other places, First Baptist Capitol Hill. I firmly believe that he has a great perspective on community policing. One short story is told that he was demonstrating downtown, I believe it was Nashville, and a man spat on him of a different color. And he stood there for a minute and he asked him and said, sir, do you have a handkerchief that I can use? And the man thought for a minute and he gave him his handkerchief. And they started a dialogue. So those kind of things. What would happen when police officers confront demonstrators who have been in police programs at a young age, who have been mentored, who have been interacted with police officers and know them. If they are standing across from each other and they know each other, I think the outcome would be different. So I'm interested in knowing what programs the police department already had. I retired in 04, so I'm sort of removed from the police department, but I'd like to know what programs they have now. How can we improve on those, and how can we implement new programs? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My struggle with the alphabet continues. Councilmember Gamble.
I spoke earlier, actually, but I would like to comment to Mr. Greaves really quickly. I totally agree with you about communities getting to know each other and the police getting to know each other and having programs out in my area specifically. The Madison precinct has done a great job with their community relations and community outreach. The community liaison at the Madison precinct meets regularly with neighborhood groups, comes out, has coffee, donuts once a month with neighborhood groups, and that's a way that the neighbors can get to know him, he can get to know the neighbors, and it has helped with relations in our area. So something like that across the city would be great.
Thank you. Mr. Harami.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Again, I'm very glad to be part of this committee. And I think most of them, they explain whatever we like to discuss, but if you look at the title of our committee is the Community Committee. I have been working with Salahuddin Center of Nashville in the Kurdish community and the Muslim community in general with that 20 years. And since 2001, we have good relation with the police department. And we solved a lot of problems, including gangs, drugs, and juvenile issues, building the relation with the schools. And all these comes through the active police department, who, while they have been active, while they have been encouraging having this relation, we were good. And when there was some changing happened to the police, like they changed the police community coordinators, and the one active, the other ones come back is not active. That's it leads to that reduce this relation. So. In general, this committee, what I prefer as a title of our committee, to study all the community, enlarging Native American community, Native Nashvilleian, mental health, every segment of the community, and also New American community, immigrant community. The immigrant community, they come from different countries, and they are not familiar with the system of this country. We had many seminars with the police department in the beginning regarding domestic violence and child abuse, and how they know about the police systems. So this one, we need to study the community and what the concern of the community they have. We can figure out this from the survey. We need to have a survey, and the community need to be involved. The policy of the police, we have to involve them. And again, as like those mentioned, those previous they talked, about the education. Education, both sides. It's not just education police department. It's educate the community about the police department, what they have, what they do for the community, and educate the police officers about the community, about their cultures, about their traditions, and also building good relation with them. If as much as an experience, I have 20 years experience here at the Salahuddin Center with the community. As much as there was good relation with the community, the rate of abnormal activities, it was reduced among the community. And also the diversity in the police departments. We need officers from the other communities. What is the barrier that the other community they don't like to join the police department? There are the barriers, we need to study those barriers. And also as like David, he said about the successful program that the community or that organization they have, we need to have to study and give them all these as a report for the policy committee to involve that with the policy of the police. And also we need to having good plans for the future police department, how they build good relation with the community. As much as police, they have good relation with the community will be part of the public safety, and they will be helpful. So that's all my recommendation. But I prefer as soon as we can prepare for the survey for the community, what the community they like, what the concern they have. If someone has been stopped with the police, how the police dealing with him. And again, in the same way, we have some police officers, one gentleman is from Afghanistan, one from Kurdish, I talk with them. What the concern that you have toward the community? What do you like the community to be? We need to also ask the police department what they like the community to be. It's not just a need relation with both sides. That's all. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you very much. Pastor Maxwell.
Yes. I want to piggyback off of the previous speaker, Brother Hawani. I think in order for the committee to really look at the next police chief, we've got to look at the embracing of diversity in our community. Our community is a very diverse community. Nashville, Tennessee, Davidson County as a whole, it is so diverse. There are situations that exist, and we can't rule out or what some have said, just dismantle the police department. That's not a possibility. That's not even reality, because there are always going to be problems within the community. But understanding the diversity of the different groups of people and the pockets of the community that make up Nashville as a whole, that has to be taken into consideration. In the recruitment of new officers to the police force, it is imperative that we look at other people of different backgrounds to recruit into the police department so that they also can train the officers that are there, some of the senior officers that are there, on how to handle different situations inside of that diverse populace in which we embrace as a community of Nashville. A few years ago, and I'm not going to be real long-winded because Eli did that for me. He's a preacher also, so he closed 2 or 3 times, so I'm not going to do that. But a few years back, there was a situation as to where there was a person being evicted from a home in the South Nashville area. The sheriff's department showed up. One of the officers of the sheriff's department was killed by the individual. I had to answer the call at Southern Hills Hospital. I'm a chaplain on call there also. I also pastor Lake Providence Baptist Church, which is in the very south side of the city. But it was so bad because of the fact the guy who was being evicted had family members who knew of his mental illness and what he was going through also. But with that, if there had been more communication between families, the family as well as the department that was about to serve the eviction papers and what was about to go down, that young man might still be alive today. He left behind a child, a very beautiful daughter and all. And those are the things that we've got to take into consideration: the diversity of the community, recruitment of other officers, embracing different situations as far as mental illness is concerned, and not always just taking that person that is mentally ill to the jail itself or to juvenile, but have evaluations done as to where the proper care is as I think Dr. Fisher said a few moments ago, there are a lot of programs out here, and we need to embrace those programs also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tom, I guess working through my alphabet here, would you like to speak next?
Okay, thank you, John. Thanks to everyone. Good evening. I was looking earlier at and listening to everyone, and a lot of talk about, well, two primary topics have come up for me is community policing. And there are 3 P's to community policing. It's people, policies, and processes. And I think that's kind of what we're thinking about here. I'd like to know more about what we're doing that follows the model of community policing, more of what we're doing here, learn more about that, and then know what a more robust effort looks like, a true community policing model for Nashville, and compare that difference to what we have and what it could be. And then there's been a lot of discussion about mental health, behavioral health, and it's painfully obvious that the police are the group that's responding to that the most. That's why we keep bringing it up. And so there's something that's broken there that perhaps we could help identify and come up with solutions in that model as well. And in addition to the behavioral mental health issues, I think we talk about substance abuse and recognize that as an illness as well. And if we look at the number of arrests that we have in Nashville, I think you're going to see the majority are related to substance abuse and mental health issues, and what we can do to change that through community policing is what I'm really interested in. And I think that addresses so many of the underlying issues that we have before us. And I think that's probably enough. I know that with so many pastors on board that I should just slow down. Next.
Thank you very much. Mr. Turnley.
Yes, I would like to also piggyback off of Tom that substance abuse, along with poverty, along with mental illness, and homelessness, all that right there contributes to the problem in the community. You know, it's not the community that's the problem. It's all of these ills that plague the community. And when, you know, someone can say that the police ride around looking angry, or they looking, you know what I'm saying, upset, you know, when you bring that type of expression to a community, then that right there automatically triggers the community. So we need, you know what I'm saying, somebody that's gonna come with a smile, because a smile attracts a smile. And also want to, I had a couple of things, with building trust in the community. Because we have, like right now on the national scene, where we have the police chief in Kenosha saying that he haven't seen a video of the brother getting shot seven times. You know, when you got people, you know what I'm saying, you know, saying things like that, and then you can come on back to our city where you got, when we had the mayor, we had the governor, and at that particular time, Anderson, when George Floyd was killed, they waited, you know what I'm saying, almost a week until it was finna be a protest in Nashville to speak out against what took place in Minnesota. Well, if you want trust from the community, you got to speak up before real leadership not gonna wait till it's a convenient time to talk about what's wrong. And that's what's wrong with the police force and everything that's taking place right now in this country. Leadership. We need leadership that's gonna stand on what's right. And I'll give a little bit about myself. My name is Larry Turnley.
And Larry, let me interrupt you. Your audio's gotten a little bit strange. Are you? Can you hear us okay?
in a bad area. Can you hear me now?
It's okay. It's gotten a little bit less. It was better a minute ago.
What about right now?
Okay, not great.
Oh well. Hey. Well.
I can hear you though. Keep going.
Okay. Yes. Me. I was shot in 1994 by Metro. I'm coming from a different angle. I was shot by the police, Nashville police, in 1994. I was charged for shooting at Metro. I was sentenced to life in prison in 1997. My sentence got overturned in 2009 from life to 24 years, and I eventually served 20 years in federal prison. When I got out, I started an annual Thanksgiving Day dinner and a Christmas coat drive in JC Neighbor School. And also, I got on with Gideon's Army. I've been with Gideon's Army for a year now, a year and a half. And also, I was the regional organizer director of the Tom Stiles presidential campaign. So that's a little bit of my background, and I'm very passionate about the community because we're in the community every day, and we know, we keep talking about how we need the police to come, or like the community can't protect themselves. The community can police themselves because in most cases, that's what takes place. The police only come after the crime has taken place. How we need community members that's in the community that can stop an incident from happening to where you don't even have to call the police. And that's what we do at Gideon's Army. We canvassed the 3728 zip code, which that was the only area where the crime rate went down here in Nashville. And I can honestly say it's because of our presence in the streets. So, when we just keep talking about how the police got to be present or the police, speaking on the community like they just helpless and they need just an overseer, let's give the community some power. Let's, give the community some type of resources where they can take some type of responsibility or some shared responsibility and watching out for themselves. So that's all I got to add.
Thank you very much. This is great. I feel like I've heard a lot of areas where people are looking for more information and want to hear from other people. I'd like to briefly kind of put out a few ideas, and we'll see if I'm hearing people well. And then what I propose to do is tomorrow, Judge Blackburn and Ms. Roberson, Dia or I, or both of us, will reach out to you. We'll set up a regular follow-up call or Zoom after these meetings so that we can kind of get our marching orders from you and help start preparing for next week and who you want to hear from. So let me just, in no particular order, sort of talk about some of the subject matter experts that I heard expressed interest. So Eli, you got a long list of people, some very high profile, some of whom I know. I think we can kind of work on possibly getting a few of those folks. I think that'd be really cool. It's easier to get people who are local. We heard a lot about community policing. I think it'd be interesting for you all to hear from folks in West Precinct who've been doing neighborhood engagement stuff since January 2018. That is something that Acting Chief Drake is sort of pushing out citywide. And I heard from one of the sergeants last week who very politely reached out to me and said, "Great committee you got there. I'm really glad you're doing that and looking at all of this, but you really need to hear from some people who are actually most directly affected by this." And that should be an important part of this. And I said, I think that's right. That's great. If you were willing to participate and have some community residents talk about, what this looks like in their perspective, I think that'd be great. So I'd love to try to get some of the officers and residents doing neighborhood engagement in the 40th and Clifton area to sort of talk about their experiences. We've got mental health co-op for sure. I think that's an important part. We've got sort of the MMPS perspective on SROs for sure. What are some other top priorities among subject experts that should be on our list? Or what else did you hear, Dia?
Well, can I add something?
Of course.
If we can add Captain Michelle Richter, who's over the domestic violence division. And the reason for that is that the partnership between the YW, a nonprofit, and her team has led to a process that the police officers are actually glad that they have another tool when they're called on domestic violence calls. And that may be a model for some of these programs, because we found out that the police officers who we thought were rather insensitive to victims when they showed up, when they had something in their toolbox other than just arresting someone, they actually really liked it and gravitated toward it. And it shows a nonprofit police partnership that puts something else in there other than just arresting someone.
Yeah. And I also heard you ask, of course, about, you know, what determines whether someone gets to go to the Vanderbilt psychiatric facility versus going to juveniles.
Yes.
So that seems like a really important question. I'm not sure if it's a police department question, maybe it's a juvenile courts question. I'll circle back with you and Judge Blackburn on that and figure out how to get at that set of questions.
John, I actually think that a really good subject matter expert would be Judge Sheila Calloway, just simply because she has worked so hard to transform her court. I think that's a very interesting story. And I think, you know, I'd be very interested to hear what, you know, policies or potential directions we should be considering to help support her work moving forward.
I think that's a great suggestion. And I can reach out to Kathy Sindbeck, her administrator, and sort of figure out what her availability is.
And John, although we have these three other groups, and I know another group is really looking at the hiring of police officers, and I do understand that there is a need to have more diversity in that practice, but that's another charge for another committee. But with that said, there is a component of what we're supposed to look at, cultural competency, as there way to make sure we have someone with some sort of expertise in that area. So even if you have a police officer that doesn't fit into one of these categories that we would like to see, that they would have the competency or cultural competencies to appreciate the position of these other populations.
John, and to echo Sharon's comment right now, we recently lost one of the protector, our connections with the local police department, actually because of egregious behaviors. So I am interested as far as the word with immigrant origin communities, what sort of engagement, cultural competence, and what exactly is happening at the local level to engage immigrant origin families. So thank you, Sharon, for the cultural competence piece as well.
That's a great point, and obviously that touches on the diversity of a force or the need to increase that. Let me work on that. I've spent more time thinking about sort of what's happening around implicit bias training, around procedural justice, but that is something which we'll need to do a little bit of digging on. It's obviously very important, and
I just want to
interesting outcome.
Sorry, John. I just want to add on this question. I really appreciate what Juliana just said and what Sharon said. One of the areas where you can look, I think, is in the field of social work. I know that for the last 5 or 6 years, social workers have stopped using the phrase cultural competency and moved to the phrase cultural humility. I think the reason that they've had that movement is to say, look, you're never fully learned when it's not your right. Like there's a process that you're going through. So I think that we have some wonderful social workers through maybe even represented with Mr. Fisher at Belmont. You have some social workers there. I know Dr. Solenberger, who's a social worker there, who has done some work in this arena. And I know the University of Tennessee has a Nashville campus that has some other social workers as well who has done work in this area. So I just want to continue to push us in terms of this concept of cultural humility. And so I just really appreciate people bringing that up. Thank you.
That's a great point. I'll follow up on those things. And we also probably have resources in Metro at Metro Human Relations Commission and DSS and so forth, where we can look for some expertise there. And then we also are in the fortunate position where we can ask Metro Nashville Community Oversight staff to help us identify best practices in certain areas. Spoken with Director Fitchard about that, and they're doing their own analysis, but I think they can help us with some of these things too.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, John. I also wanted to suggest that MNPS is doing some very interesting and very good work around restorative practices. And it might be helpful for this committee to hear more about what they've done, what they're doing, and again, what else needs to be done.
Yep.
And then I also, now that you bring it up, I think I would love to hear from the Community Oversight Board. I think we've heard a lot about the nature of this committee and that body. And in order for us to make sure that we work hand in hand, I think we need to hear from them. So we can better support and bolster their work, John. So that's something that I would like to see sooner rather than later. Learn about their work, what they're doing, and how can we better support that important group of people.
That's great. Well, we can ask Director Fitchard to come. We can reach out to Ms. Davis, who's the former COB chair. So lots of resources there.
I just want to affirm Ms. Diaz-Cirillo's statement about MNPS. We have a social emotional learning department. We were one of the first districts in the entire nation to develop that because we understood social emotional learning as it related to the entire child. We don't do everything well, but this area of restorative practices and restorative justice, I agree, we've spent a lot of time, energy, effort, and funding to build up a department and to get training for teachers on a regular basis in this arena.
John, I think it would be good to talk to Dr. Williamson. She is at Elam and heads their mental health and wellness behavioral issue department.
Fantastic. Well, what I will do, I think, as a next step, if this makes sense, is first, we will work on getting minutes from this meeting to the committee chair and vice chair, and of course, other members as well. Second, we've got a lot of great names on this list. We also need to look at our schedule and try to slot, names to upcoming meetings. So we will work on that, and Dia and I will reach out to you, Ms. Roberson and Judge Blackburn, work on the first name, and we'll be hand in glove with you, and we'll rely on you to sort of tell us who you want to hear from when, and we will start reaching out to people in the next day or two, with the hope that we can get some of these subject matter experts to appear at the next meeting.
John, I also think we have one piece of housekeeping, which is this committee would be due to meet a week from today at the same time. However, a week from today is Labor Day. Which,
oh my gosh.
Yes, which based on the calendar, what we've slotted for the next meeting of this committee is the upcoming Thursday. Which I believe is Thursday the 10th. I don't have the, yes, it is. It's Thursday the 10th. And I'm just wondering if there are some scheduling opportunities for Thursday the 10th. One might be is if we start at the 5 o'clock or the 4 o'clock hour, because we will have all 3 committees meeting on Thursday the 10th. And so I think we need to be sure that we're fully staffed for this committee as well as the other committees. And another option might be meeting at the midday period and doing a shorter meeting, maybe a 90-minute or a 60-minute meeting, and then doing a longer meeting when we're back on the Monday schedule. And so it would be helpful to know from committee members if they could do a lunchtime meeting on the Thursday at 12 or 12:30, or if they would prefer a later afternoon at, say, 4 o'clock or after.
I would prefer later. I mean, even 5, 4, whatever. That 4, that's fine. 5:30, 5 doesn't matter.
I'd like to add, I'm late to this committee, and I would like to join every Monday. However, I'm also on a Public Works Council committee. I think when you all decided on the Monday, you didn't have any council members on the committee, so Monday wasn't a conflict. So Thursday works great for me, so I'll be looking forward to that. And whatever time you all decide, Thursday is great, but I may not be able to attend some of the Monday meetings just because of the conflict with the Public Works Committee meeting.
Is there, so we have a preference for 4 or 5. It doesn't sound like midday is good for you, Ms. Roberson.
I can make it work. That's just a preference later. I can make the midday work. It's just that it's
right. This would be just a one-off if we needed to do it. If we did need to do noon, is there anyone for whom that would not work?
It would be problematic for me as a teacher, but I think I could probably juggle some things with our schedule. We have lunch from 12 to 1, and then maybe I could juggle some more things with. So I can try to juggle. I can be like, hey, do this. I can try. So we'll see.
Okay. Is there anyone who could not do 4 o'clock on Thursday? Okay. All right, that's very helpful. Thank you for flagging that, Dia. We do need to make sure that we can get all 3 subcommittees working well on Thursday. So having the option to try to do an hour meeting at lunch could be very helpful for us. And we'll talk to the other committees as well. 4 could also be good. And we'll follow up with all of you via your committee chair and co-chair on that.
And could I just quickly ask, you said that one would be an hour. How much time should we budget routinely for this?
What do you think, Dia?
So as I think on average, each meeting will be close to 90 minutes to 120 minutes, depending on if you have subject matter experts join us.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Sure.
And of course, we want everyone to participate, but we do understand that you all have very busy lives and everything, is being recorded. So it's all available to review if there's a meeting you can't make.
And then, John, sorry to interrupt, but Judge Blackburn and Sharon, I kindly ask that we either have a timekeeper or someone to monitor our time as well for the next couple of meetings and make sure that there's equal representation and we hear from different people in the committee.
May I also make a request as we're talking about our priorities and jumping to subject matter experts? If we're going to evaluate what the current practices are, and part of our charge is to measure what we're doing now, I really need more information. If we're going to think about the use of force policy, I'd like to have the use of force policy. If we're going to consider how we're doing with vulnerable populations, I'd like to see the police department policies. I'd like to see data about their interactions with certain communities. There's a whole baseline of information that I don't think we need to take committee time to do, but I expect part of my role in the committee will be to be able to hear from subject matter experts with an understanding of what the current standard is. So if there's some way to pull together, even a rather large set of policies and procedures that we should be familiar with, I feel like I need that in order to take the first step of making some subject matter or some subjective evaluation of what a best practice is. I need to know what the practice is now.
Yes, so that's a great point, David. Let me speak to that briefly. So first, the level setting package will have some of that information. Second, I will work on that with you, and we can connect about that directly too. So my understanding is that MMPD's policy manual is online. I was talking with Peter Valier, the research director over at Metro Nashville Community Oversight, about this. And what he told me was that it is online, but it does not reflect all of the training bulletins that have occurred over the course of the past year or 2 years. And training bulletins they are policy. So one thing that I need to work on, and I'll put this on my MMPD reach out list, is how do we get a comprehensive picture of policy in effect? Is that accurate that the most recent training policies aren't in the manual? How do we get a complete picture of that? I'll work on that with you. And I appreciated Peter flagging that issue for me. And MMPD policy is also very large, so prepare yourself. They've got a lot of policies.
Great. No, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's War and Peace. Thank you, everyone. I want to defer to the committee chair and vice chair. Are there other issues that we should discuss at this point, or shall our next course of action be to release you to your evenings, and then I will follow up with both of you tomorrow, and we'll set up our follow-up meeting and start working on subject matter experts.
Sharon?
No,
what are your thoughts?
I'm good. The only thing I will say is that we're going to have to come up with something that has some level of proof, and that's going to take data and statistics. And I don't know, there's so much of it. I've seen so much of it. I've wrestled with it for so long. So that's one thing that we may need some data points of, how much do they have data by race, by zip code, and all those sorts of things. Nashville's big, and there are a lot of communities, and I don't know whether or not that data exists. I know some data exists by race and by crime and statistics and all that sort of thing, but anything like that would be helpful, I think, to the committee.
Totally agree. And I think that what you'll receive hopefully tomorrow in the level setting package will be a good first step at that.
Okay.
I'm anxious to see that tomorrow.
Yep.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you all for your time. We're really excited to be starting this work with you. There's a lot to learn. And I think it's very clear what we need to be learning about and the direction that we all want to go in. So very much appreciate your time, and thank you on behalf of Mayor Cooper. And we're going to work hard to support you and get the information you need to do a good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you much.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.go.